radio station.
Long Gone Summer is the name of the ESPN documentary on the Sammy Sosa Mark McGwire home run race of 1998. And to help us get a better understanding on what I saw only in bits and pieces yesterday, not the guts of it, is our old friend Dan Wiederer, longtime, big-time pro football writer here at Star Tribune, and has gone on, of course, to bigger and better things at the Chicago Tribune, where he largely covers the Bears and pro football, but he writes about everything, and had a very entertaining exchange with Teddy Greenstein in the Trib pages today on their own reaction. They got to see it ahead of time, the documentary. Mr. Wiederer, it's good to hear your voice, man. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dan. How are you?
Doing very well. I'm going to give you a piece of breaking news, at least as offered up by Jeff Passan, that might be worth a quick mention. Rob Manfred tells ESPN Greeny that he's, quote, not confident there will be a 2020 baseball season. Unfortunately, I can't tell you that I am 100% certain that's going to happen. And, of course, he was the 100% guy in the last quote. I think late last week, he said, I can tell you with 100% certainty there will be a season of some sort. So what do we make of it? Is it possible that baseball is done for 2020?
My 7-year-old son has been asking me since late February when the Major League season is going to start, and there's been a lot of twists and turns to my answers every week for the last 3.5 months, and every time one of these bits of bad news surfaces, it is such a hard thing to stomach, given the period that we're in sports, given the period that we're in the world, and the fact that these two sides can't find their way to a middle ground it's so disheartening, given what this game could do to just sort of lighten the mood a little bit, right? Yeah. In 2020.
Well, and you can even argue a sport that could definitely use a little bit of that tonic, perhaps more than any other, for all the obvious reasons, and they had a chance maybe to get ahead of the other sports in that regard. It's astonishing. It really is. 1998, most of us remember it. I remember being at Wrigley Field for at least one of the home run derby moments with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire. It debuted on ESPN on Sunday night. It doesn't appear that either nationally or even in the Chicago area, where, of course, there'd be extra special interest with Sosa, that we have come close to matching the interest and the ratings levels that the Michael Jordan Bulls Last Dance documentary did.
Yeah, there's no question about that. First of all, we've been really lucky here in Chicago in this no sports world to have these ESPN Films documentaries to fill our weeks of conversation. And certainly the Jordan Bulls still drive conversation at a very high level. When I got a chance to see the pre-screening of Long Gone Summer, I was left a little bit empty, just not having that same sort of adrenaline rush or that juice that The Last Dance gave us, which ironically was from the same time period, the summer of 1998, right? Is that same sort of hub of where these two historic sports moments were rooted for these films. And I think one of the struggles with this film last night was that they glossed over the PED portion of the story so significantly that it just felt wrong. It just felt like this unscrupulous top layer was ignored until very, very late in the film. And I think that left a lot of people saying, man, there was a lot of meat left on the bone in terms of the very real conflict and tension and drama that you could have squeezed out of a documentary about a summer that, at the time, I've said for a long time, that the chasm, and you remember it, the chasm between how it all felt in the moment and how we see it now is so wide in terms of the fun and the adrenaline and the happiness. And now you just look back at it with it's kind of gross to know that a lot of that was artificially inflated by what those guys were doing.
I think you've nailed it. And I didn't see all of it, but I think you've nailed what struck me about what I was watching. And it raises the interesting question that it almost looked like, all right, we feel like a big part of this has to be the romance of how it felt at the moment, but we can't unknow what we've learned since. And to that extent, I think this whole project might have been doomed unless you go flat out and say, we're going to make it 90% about what we've learned since. And we're not going to gloss over any of it. But then I don't know if you get the same cooperation or you get the same kind of commentary from McGuire, mainly Sosa to a certain degree as well. I think that was sort of the contradiction, that the tough spot they were in. If they go whole hog on it, I don't know if they get the same level of cooperation, but we can't unknow what we know.
That's always the tightrope you face as a storyteller, is trying to figure out how do you cross from one side to the other when you rely on intimate access with Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa, and yet you still need to try to tell the story in an honest fashion that really gets to the heart of the matter. And I think maybe there was a way to do it where you're bouncing back and forth from the joys of '98 to all the things that we learned later, to the appearance before Congress, to all of the scandals that have erupted in the PED era of baseball since. And it's just so hard to reconcile it all. And here in Chicago, there's been this sort of ongoing debate. Sammy and the Cubs have been separated for a long time. There has been a pining amongst a large group of the Cubs fan base, and I'll talk more about this in a minute. I don't really fully understand why, for him to come back and be honored and celebrated and reunited and have his moment in the sun in Wrigley Field again. And I'm with you in regards to, once you know what you know and you can't unknow it, it's hard to sort of shine the spotlight in the same way and to keep that trophy up on the center of your mantle, right, when you know what it was rooted in. And so that's the challenge of all this. Sammy, I think, much less so than Mark McGuire, has been unwilling to be contrite and to own up and acknowledge some of the missteps he took. He almost seems to exalt that he was not ever caught with a smoking gun more than he's ever vehemently denied participating in any of this. And so it all just leaves that tension and that uncomfortable nature to the whole thing.
So Sammy does not in any meaningful way use this opportunity to kind of come clean and clear the air and maybe even, I don't know, make it possible to look on the other side of this and about the possibility of coming back to Chicago. There's really not. How would you describe the approach he does take in that regard in this doc?
I think Sammy still clings to the numbers he put up for a 6-season stretch there. He hit more than 60 home runs 3 times, and he feels he was one of the best baseball players in the game, and he may be right about that. But there's the other part of this that again, you can't deny that a lot of this is cheapened, a lot of it is tainted, and you have what were once these romanticized records, and now 61 home runs. You kind of shrugged at it for a long time because of the way baseballs were flying out of the park for a long time after these guys got that home run show started in '98. And Sammy just seems very content with who he was and who he is, and doesn't seem willing to sort of press the rewind button and own up to his mistakes. And that, I think, is ultimately what will keep the divide between him and the Cubs organization very intact and in place, where there isn't going to be a feel-good reunion anytime soon. I don't even know if a feel-good reunion is possible, Dan, and I'm not really sure what honoring Sammy Sosa, with a first pitch or some sort of pregame ceremony at Wrigley Field would really feel like, or what it would accomplish for either side.
Dan Wiederer, Chicago Tribune writer and columnist, formerly Star Tribune, former regular member of this broadcast as well, over the years, going way, way back. I have a central conflict in general about this whole philosophy, in that, when we kind of pay attention to what's going on in the world on several levels, there's a part of me that says those of us who write about sports or talk about sports need to let go, even if it's true about the Sosa McGuire summer, that at some point it might actually be worthy of moving on, because there's so many, in the grand scheme of things, more important things that matter. Locally, you want an analogy, the Gophers men's basketball Final Four run. And I've argued about that with people, because for me, I've never been able to let go of it, or I've never been of how it ended, the academic fraud scandal that it wrought eventually, bringing down that program entirely. And there are other people who say, yeah, but the basketball happened and it was cool and it was romantic and it was fun and it was intense. And all that's true, but for me it's the same. I can't, even if, nobody was killed during that. Yeah. It's all relative. I have a hard time approaching it with the same zest and zeal because, once again, I can't unknow what I already know.
I'm with you, and I'm starting to realize that I think we're in the minority on this because over the last week, as the social discussion has been back in the forefront here in Chicago, you just hear so many people calling into sports talk radio, responding on Twitter, making their own posts and just saying the way that Sammy made Wrigley Field feel for particularly 1998 and several of the years that followed was so electric and so enjoyable and so much a part of people's happiness during that time period that they are more than willing to ignore the seedy underbelly to the whole thing and to just get past that. I'm not able to get there. I don't know if it's this moral high ground or if it's just a wanting to acknowledge things for the full complexity and nuance and depth that they possess in terms of, we should have standards. We should expect that the highest achievements that we celebrate are reached in a manner that is above board, right? And that is trustworthy in a lot of ways. And when that's violated, I think for some of us, it's hard to get past. Clearly, for a lot of others, it's not hard to get past. They just want to remember how it felt and what that energy was. And so they're more than happy to just cling to the memories and ignore the other stuff.
I guess it's all relative. I mean, again, I don't think people need to go to prison, but it's a matter of, all right, how far you want to go, whether it's a documentary or having a big production, having everybody come back, that I think for some of us forces us to. It's not like it's in the front of my mind all the time what happened here with Clem and that Gopher run. But if you're going to put it in everybody's face, then with a celebration or let's come back and let's just move on with everything. Let's find that banner and let's find a place to put that banner because this is so many years later and we've got time marches on and there are bigger things to worry about and let's heal. But then I think it becomes hard to not push back and say, yeah, but do you remember all those details? And to me, it's very similar in a larger context because that home run summer was a national story, and even international. And I think you can speak maybe a little bit to what you remember and then what you saw in this documentary in that regard, because the part I saw, I think, did give a good indication how whether they were home or it was a home team or road team, some of these guys were getting, McGuire and Sosa were getting standing ovations. I think McGuire, they talked about a curtain call he got on the road. It became a national celebration at the time.
There's no question. And that part of the story is so captivating and sort of enthralling and remembering just how much juice there was, pardon the pun there, but that summer in terms of what that energy felt like on a daily basis. And I think one of the cool things that the film reminded us of was, McGuire got past Maris playing against the Cubs in September at Busch Stadium, but that home run chase went all the way to the last day of the season where you're on the last weekend on the Friday night of the last weekend of the season, and Sammy actually sets the record and hits 66 before McGuire hits 66. And then McGuire responds with 5 more homers over the last 3 days of the season. And so really from start to finish, that year had such a theatrical pull to it. And there was a magnetism that is hard to replace. And that was all real. And we all remember how that felt. And I have no problem with anyone wanting to dust off the old photo album and go through it and remember the memories and the moments and the energy that came with it. I just don't feel like we need to pull it back on the center stage and throw a parade and shoot confetti and and pretend like it was all the greatest thing in the world, because as we've learned years later, there was a lot that came with it that ended up sort of changing the landscape of the game in a lot of ways.
Well, that's what's interesting, because I having read some Tribune stuff all week, the last few weeks, and maybe it wasn't just Tribune, maybe it was just multimedia in Chicago. There was this sort of this feeling I had about, that remarkable 20 home run month by Sammy. Just unbelievable. And it gets chronicled. And here's the montage of every one of those home runs. And I even mentioned it, I think, to Gaardsy on a show here. It's like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, we get that. But it's almost like there's either amnesia or we're just moving on past what was the elephant in the room regarding all of that, even if he was a very accomplished home run hitter. And as you say, we may be in the minority on it. There may be more people who are ready to just say, let's that's enough. We've lectured people enough about it. We know, we're not pretending it didn't happen. But there are times it almost feels like if you're going to try to enjoy it, you almost have to be lying to yourself as you're doing it, because suddenly you're just sort of like remarking about what an unbelievable month. You believe that month? That was magical. It's like, well, yeah, it was, but you can't leave the rest of it out. And if you can't leave the rest of it out, then what's the point of obsessing over it this many years later? That's what I don't get.
Yeah, and 5 years later, Sammy broke his bat, and there was cork inside of it, right? So, it wasn't this one-time thing. It was clear that he was making a concerted effort at every turn to, try to enhance his performance, and did so to a high level, and took what was, a tremendous skill set, and took it up 2 or 3 levels higher than it had ever been before. And so all that's there to it. I think, I recall they showed this prominently in the documentary, a Cubs-Cardinals game in August where Sosa passed McGuire. They were in the late 40s. I think Sammy hit 49, and then McGuire came back later in the same game and hit 49 and 50 to pass him. And when you're talking about a Cubs-Cardinals game in the middle of the summer and the energy that's in that building in a regular year, it's off the charts. And then you add this whole storyline to it in the middle of the season where, oh, by the way, the Cubs also made the playoffs for the first time in 9 years and really, added that exclamation point to things with Sammy winning the MVP that year. There is this true jolt of electricity that came with all that. But again, yeah, you look back and to know all that happened with Sammy's career after that, to know all that McGuire has eventually admitted to know these guys eventually sat before Congress. And, oh, by the way, Sammy, who was this, very engaging, charismatic guy in front of the media throughout 1998, suddenly couldn't answer a question in front of Congress because he didn't understand the English language and didn't feel comfortable speaking it again. These are all parts of the story, right? And they're all things that I think deserved a black light run over them to a greater extent, just so that we could have the full context to the whole thing. And in that regard, I think the film fell a little bit short.
Wasted opportunity. I think you're right. This will be your exit question. One football question. Who starts, if the season starts on time, who starts at quarterback for the Bears in their season opener?
How many times do you think I've gotten this question from fans, friends, family members over the last 3 months? It's been the question in Chicago here since March. My gut says that it will be Nick Foles, and that Nick Foles has the trust of the majority of the offensive coaching staff and will ultimately prove that. This is a offseason unlike any other, though, and we have no idea how long this quote-unquote open competition will be for the Bears, given that we don't even know how many practices or preseason games they'll have before they take the field in week 1. So I wouldn't be shocked if Trubisky still had the starting job in week 1, but was on a very, very short leash. And I think it's only a when, not if question of when Foles eventually gets that promotion to QB1 and he takes over the 2020 Bears.
We appreciate the time. It's been too long since we've caught up. I continue to enjoy all of your good work, and we will certainly try to stay in touch. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, let's do it again soon. Thanks.
Much appreciated. Dan Wiederer, Chicago Tribune, formerly Star Tribune, regular on this program as well, if you want to go back far enough, and we all go back far now. That's how old I am. Let's pause. We're going to do a short segment. We'll prepare for a bottom-of-the-hour conversation with the St. Cloud Police Chief, Blair Anderson, who had quite a tumultuous and potentially very dangerous evening and morning, more specifically. But we'll get a shorty in first right ahead of that. Let's get to a couple of fascinating emails before we prepare for the Chief. Don't forget Johnny Athletic in
KFAN.
Fairly tumultuous night and early morning in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and a man who was in the middle of much of it, because that's part of his job, is kind enough to join us. Blair Anderson is the police chief in St. Cloud, contributed to this program many times over the years, but rarely, Chief, has it been this directly related to your own backyard, your own job, but it certainly was over the course of the last several hours. We welcome you back to the program. We hope that you've gotten some sleep, but we appreciate you giving us a couple of minutes here, Chief. Let's start with, for people who may not be up to speed, Let's start, I guess, with the encounter that I believe occurred just past midnight last night. In other words, this morning, involving an 18-year-old individual I still don't know has been identified at this point. Tell us what went down there and how this sort of put into play a number of other issues that you had to deal with in your job.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. And I want to say first that I want everybody's thoughts and prayers going out to our officers and our entire St. Cloud Police Department family and law enforcement all over, and our officers' families. The good news is that our officer is alive. So, Dan, I feel, and I'm not being flip, Dan, I feel like we need the Vince Lombardi drop. You know, what the hell's going on out there?
Yeah,
I really do. With a small dose of Marvin Gaye, and I'm not trying to minimize
right.
this. You know, what's going on? So, Dan, when you get a call at 2:30, it's rarely good news. 2:30 a.m. By the time I get to the PD, I've learned that one of our officers has been shot, non-life-threatening injuries. That officer and another got information about a man with a gun at one of our local businesses. They confronted that individual. Foot pursuit ensued. They were able to catch up with the individual. Physical struggle. Gun comes out. Officer shot. And, I want to be clear about this, that there might be some folks out there trying to give us a little bit of heat, about the decision that was made. But the officers that were there. We weren't. They made the decision that they thought was best at the time, and they were able to subdue that individual without discharging their firearms. And I've got their backs, and I won't let anybody second guess that decision. So shortly after the incident, Dan, shortly, the information on the internet was that St. Cloud police officer had shot 2 young black males, one in the head who was dead and one who was clinging to life. And it is the most dangerous and the most reckless kind of thing that we find ourselves immersed in. It's strange credulity. It is beyond any logic. And from there, we've got a crowd forming, and they make their way from the south side of town to the north side where the PD is. And
this at that point, it's about what time today or this morning?
It's probably 3:34.
Okay,
might have even been a little bit later, Dan. I'll have to go back because we do have a timeline
right.
on that. I haven't had a chance to check it yet, but it was probably after 4. Let's just say 4:30, and we had our eyes on them the whole time, and along the way, of course, they're gathering up rocks, and they were coming to the police department with the sole purpose of causing damage and trying to take over our police department. And that wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen. So,
we're going to put the chief on hold. Obviously, suddenly we got like a weird connection, a little bit of weird vibe going in there, and it sounded like he had another call coming in. I'm sure it's still a very, very busy and active scene in St. Cloud. We're chatting with the police chief, Blair Anderson, who's been a friend of this program for quite some time. Give it another shot, Gaardsy, you think? A little bit better? All right, let's try it one more time with the chief. We were getting kind of an erratic signal there for a minute, Chief, and you were talking about a crowd forming, heading in your direction, at which point you have some decisions to make in preparing. What was your approach as this crowd is forming and you know where they intend to end up?
Well, and again, we had eyes on them, and we knew they were collecting rocks. And they were coming to the police department with the intent of destroying property and possibly to take it over. So at that point, we deployed all the assets we had, and of course they showed up, and we lost a couple of windows, but we gassed them, and they dispersed. So as a result of that, there were 4 arrests with respect to that incident. We had some minor property damage, some other businesses along the way. But the good news is, all is calm right now, and we're still holding our breath, Dan, a little bit. We need to we need to exhale a little bit.
You know, I know in talking to you about this over the years that part of your approach has been to potentially, I guess you'd say, to attempt to better do your job at a time like this is day to day establish relationships with individuals who you think you can speak to, who might have their finger on the pulse of a given community at a time like this, establish relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So I do you feel like that paid off for you last night, or is part of the wild card here a concern that you don't always know who the leadership is or who you can attempt to appeal to that you've attempted to establish relationships with in the past, hopefully building a certain measure of trust within them?
Well, and for us, Dan, we absolutely know who the leadership is, and those are the folks I called first. I don't know where the individuals who were part of that mob reside. They certainly don't embody the spirit of the vast majority of citizens in St. Cloud. And, you know, it's unfortunate, Dan. One of my supervisors was on scene as the crowd was gathering. And, of course, there's always one, the rabble-rouser. My supervisor knew that individual, called him to the side and said, hey, this is what really happened, calmed him down. But when he went back to the mob, they didn't want any part of that. He tried to explain to them that what they had read on social media wasn't true. In fact, it was a lie. I'm calling it a lie. And it's the worst kind of lie because it's dangerous and it's reckless. And so, Dan, you know, we find ourselves at a place, and you and I talk about this a lot, where, you know, people just want to believe what they want to believe, and it doesn't matter how many facts you present them with, how much proof you can offer them. You know, if you're not in total agreement with their point of view, they're not even listening anymore. And that's very sad and very, very scary.
As far as you can tell, things are stable today, but I assume you still, like you say, you have to kind of stay on alert. How would you describe the scene in St. Cloud today? Are you preparing for any issues later, or do you believe that now, you know, that the facts have been established here about what took place, that there's no reason necessarily you should think that there's going to be a second night or, you know, a more activity in terms of the police department being challenged?
Well, I certainly want to believe that, Dan. We certainly got our money's worth out of our community leaders that we contacted for the press conference today, and they continue to spread that message and debunk those myths. But, you know, since the Mr. Floyd's death, you know, we've all been on high alert, and we will continue to be until there's no reason to be. So we're always prepared. We've got resources, and we're going to use them. So, you know, these are very interesting times where, for lack of a better way of saying it, Dan. But, you know, the mood across the city later on this morning and this afternoon was, it appeared to be back to normal. There were no other flare-ups, but, you know, we're monitoring and keeping our pulse on the thing. And we're using those resources, Dan. You know, right. we make deposits in that reservoir of trust every single day, and it does pay dividends.
You know, in terms of the police department building itself, have you fortified or feel like you had to fortify a little bit in terms of what protection is in front of there? Is that gone now, or how are you handling that? No, we have. And there's a constant presence on the exterior of the perimeter of that building. And if you've never seen it, it's a massive building. It's a beautiful building. But we have fortified it, and until we're comfortable that there's no imminent threats, we're going to leave it that way. And I hate to do that because, you know, we like for the public to know that we are open, and that is their building. It's a public building. People come there for a variety of reasons every day. But right now, we just want to make sure and keep everybody safe. So the fortifications will remain in place until we're satisfied that there's no more imminent threats. We're chatting with St. Cloud Police Chief Blair Anderson, had a very active evening last night and morning. You mentioned in this case your officers did not fire back and were able to subdue the individual, even though according to the reports, this 18-year-old individual did shoot and not badly wound. You say one of your officers. So do you have any concern? Part of this is, I think, that what's going to get people's attention is there is a belief that the trend must be to de-escalation, and that this example is going to be used as one in which there was obviously decisions made to not use the police. Your police did not use their firearms, and you're saying you're backing them up 100%. There's going to be people on both sides of that, as you know, say, well, they should have, or they're going to say this is proof that in every situation, the way the police officers handled this without firing anything means it can happen, or it should happen in many other situations around the country as well. Can you speak to that? Well, how do you respond to people who are going to try, I think, in their own way to use this particular example for whatever point of view they're trying to advance?
Well, I'll take part of the latter, Dan, and none of the former. And so here's how I would respond to that is none of us were there. Those officers were there. They made the decision that they thought was best at the time, and I'm going to back them up. Let's be clear that in no way means that is what is going to happen in every encounter like that. And so people across the country have been asking, well, when is it necessary for an officer, to use deadly force? So my answer to them is going to be, there's a textbook definition right there. Those officers could very well have discharged their firearm to get that situation under control, but they made a different decision, and they've got my support on that. So I know that people are going to take it around the block to further their own agendas. But that's the best answer I have for you. And, people should not expect that can and will be the outcome in every situation, because it won't be.
We've talked about this stuff, I think, as recently as last week, and it strikes me in listening to you be kind of having your own mini crisis and having to navigate through all of that. What I sense in your voice is a level of command, but also a level of tension that I think speaks to your concern, not necessarily just in St. Cloud, but in the country, that we're on edge, that every time one of these events takes place, we saw it in Atlanta, obviously. This goes back in this phase, you could say, to 3 weeks ago today was the George Floyd murder, that you're worried about how the country is going to be able to try to come out of this and find some better place. Speak a little bit, as someone who's been in law enforcement for a long time and has thought about these things a lot. How worried are you right now?
I'm worried on several different fronts, Dan. Number one, I'm worried that if we continue to paint with these broad brushes and alienate the 99% of the police officers who I know are out there doing this job the right way for the right reason, good people are going to start walking away. And who could blame them? I'm worried that our lawmakers are going to be impetuous and fold to the hue and cry and pass sweeping legislation that won't affect any structural change. And we're going to be right back here again, whether it's next month, next week, next year. I'm worried because we were already at a critical juncture with respect to the number of people applying to become law enforcement officers. And, I need people to hear this. Those are all real concerns, and they need to be addressed, Dan. Make no mistake, I know that there needs to be some changes and some reform. And part of this we've done to ourselves as a discipline over time. But I really, really want our lawmakers to be thoughtful and to be cautious and to talk to the people out here who are doing this the right way and getting positive results, and make a list based on that, Dan. Heck, find the 5 best PDs in the state and talk to those people and find out, what are you doing that's working? I guarantee you there'll be similarities, and make your list from there. Don't just respond because it's politically expedient. And, at the top of the list, Dan, and I probably have said this before, I'll keep saying it. We have got to do something about the binding arbitration system here in any place that has a similar system. We got to do something to get the power away from the unions over administrative issues. Ask any chief, and they will tell you how difficult it is to get rid of a problem employee and how demoralizing that is when you've done your due diligence and you make the right decision, and that person needs to be terminated. They don't need to be in this profession, and you're forced to take them back. It's debilitating, it's crippling, and it's one of the biggest challenges we face, and I hope our lawmakers are listening.
Is there a way to, because I'm sure you would agree, as someone who's been in law enforcement for a long time and not always necessarily in management, is there a balancing act that can better still protect individual officers to where they feel like they have an opportunity to defend themselves in a situation like this when their conduct is called into question, and yet also make it more likely that officers who have, continuing issues, and you as a police chief or any police chief knows it, can actually attempt to end that officer's ability to continue to work to be an employee, thereby you could say exacerbating a problem that's already there. Is there a way to balance both that makes sense to you?
Honestly, Dan, I really don't believe we need to balance both. We need to give administrators the ability to administrate. That's why we are there. Of course, there need to be checks and balances. But, some of these things are so clear cut. I mean, you can't tell me that an officer with 18 or 19 complaints in that many years wasn't, somebody didn't try to discipline that individual. And, on this one, Dan, I don't see any room for balancing. Doesn't mean I'm right. Perhaps someone else has another point of view, but from where I'm sitting right now, I don't see any need to try to balance that. This is one of those professions where if you don't have the right temperament, if you're not doing this job the right way for the right reasons, you need to be gone. And if we don't wrap our minds around that mindset and that attitude, we're going to stay right here spinning our wheels.
Is it fair to say, though, then, that in order to get those changes, there are legislative aspects of that do mean going to people beyond police chiefs in terms of getting feedback and input, that you're going to have to make changes to laws. You're going to have to make changes to what arbitration means, so that you do need the help of people outside what might be classified as, most police forces, or even in positions of supervisor like you, in order to bring about those changes. Because as you know, Chief Arredondo here very clearly, I think, you could argue the last several police chiefs in one manner or another have had pretty big ideas on what they had identified as the problem here, but felt like they could not really get to the heart of it because of those layers of protection that were in place, and that in some cases were mandated by whatever the union contract was or whatever the law was.
Agreed, and I'd be willing to bet you a week's pay, Dan, that if we peel back those layers, we're going to keep coming to the same source for why we are forced to take these people back again and again. And, nobody despises a bad cop more than a good one, because they make things exponentially harder for all of us than they need to be. And so, yeah, I'm going to beat this drum for a long time. We need the help from the State House. We need help from the State House. Some of the other things that are being proposed, in my opinion, are just window dressing, Dan. And I've got neither the time nor the inclination for that kind of nonsense, because it's not going to move the needle. So I hope they're listening, and I hope that they're a little bit more methodical than it appears they're being. I mean, there are mayors all over the country already that have signed absurd laws into their city ordinances that an officer needs to give a warning before they shoot. Well, that's not practical all the time, Dan. This isn't TV. You know, there are times when the minute you exit your squad car, you're under fire. And so that's the kind of nonsense I mean. We can't go down that rabbit hole. We're far enough in the hole as it is. It's time for us to start being smart and doing things that are actually going to affect positive and sustainable change. One
last item for you, Chief. Thanks for the extended time, as always. In the time you've been there, give me an example of a program that's near and dear to your heart that you have put into place as an example of trying to get to, if you want to call it community policing or community outreach, that you think has been effective, has been helpful, and sort of what that's about, and you know how it might be applied elsewhere as well.
Sure. Our Youth Leadership Academy, which we run every year for young girls and young boys, and the tenets of that are respect, responsibility, and trust. It's a week-long program. We teach them some leadership skills and some team building exercises and some classroom work and fitness and nutrition, and I mean everything from table etiquette to conflict resolution, because our goal is to build better citizens, you know, through early and sustained intervention and mentorship. Of course, our PAL program, our Community Outpost Initiative, which Tom Emmer is going to be introducing a bill on the House floor if he hasn't already, to get money appropriated to get these all over the country. And that simply is a house in one of your high crime neighborhoods where you can run all kinds of programs out of there. Mentorship programs, after school programs for kids, helping them with their homework. Dad, I could go on all day long. The Greater St. Cloud Public Safety Foundation runs that. We don't burden the taxpayers with the operation of that kind of thing. There are a myriad of things that work. Bigs and Blue, I let my officers mentor and big brothers and big sisters on duty, so long as the call load allows. You know, we've got partnerships with the Rotary, with faith-based groups, with corporate partners, on and on and on. I could go on all day. I know you don't have the time for that, but this is what I mean when I say we're doing the work every single day. And so we've established and maintained that legitimacy, that trust that is in President Obama's 21st century policing model. And it wasn't in response to Mr. Floyd's death or the mall attack we had a few years ago. It is a matter of course for us. This is what we do every single day, and we're proud of it. And I couldn't be more proud of the St. Cloud community, the men and women who serve valiantly and proudly every day.
Chief, I hope you have a quieter night tonight. I appreciate the passion you bring to all this discussion, because I know it means it's this is your life, man. This means everything to you, and I appreciate you giving us once again as much time as you did on it. We will definitely try to stay in touch. Thanks, Chief.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much, my friend. All right, take care.
You too. That's Chief Blair Anderson. He is the police chief in St. Cloud, Minnesota. They had quite a scary early morning that then went into more like 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning at the police department headquarters building in St. Cloud as well. We're running a little bit late. Johnny Athletic is going to join in the 5 o'clock hour. Top 5 at 5 will include the beginning of the end, or the middle of the end, or the end of the end for Major League Baseball.
Depends on where you thought they were before this.
That's true.
So probably middle of the end of the end of the end. We've got a 3M Open update as it pertains to fans coming to Blaine. And Richard Pitino just received a big transfer commitment. And everybody listening will be happy.
Whoa.
The kid is from Minnesota.
On the Fan.
All I know is I'm in love with you. Even though you said that we were...
John Krasinski, a.k.a. Johnny Athletic, is indeed back with us for segment number 2. It's an interesting thing, because you can correct me on this. but I believe most major professional leagues, the commissioner technically is picked by the owners. And to that extent, the owners are the commissioner's boss. That's a fact, whether it should be or not. And so when there's pushback of, well, who you working for here? Are you interested in the betterment of the game? Or are you? Well, in fact, to a certain extent, because the owners have that power, the dirty little secret is that a given commissioner works for the owners. What the best ones historically have found a way to do, and it takes artistry to do it, and it probably takes cojones to do it as well, it probably takes creativity to do it, is still find a way to push back on the owners at times. David Stern most assuredly did it in his inimitable style. Some baseball, Fay Vincent tried to do it, a guy we're going to try to have on again this week, has been on this show many times, and ultimately it cost him in Fay Vincent's case. But to me, that's the tricky, tough challenge, I guess, for any commissioner, is the best ones find a way to not anger the owners enough, even as they're kind of sometimes saying, I'm going to push back on you because in the end, I don't think this is going to be for the betterment of the game. It defines leadership, I would say, but that's sort of the challenge, is it not? Because right now, I think most people look at Rob Manfred and they say, he's a lawyer guy who just he's in the owner's back pocket. He has no either ability or maybe even doesn't even feel comfortable about surviving efforts to challenge them on some key issues, and that it makes it less likely that you have somebody in there going, guys, we got to figure this out because there is too much to lose.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dan. And when you look at it, I think, especially today in some of the social media discourse and things, Rob Manfred, you hear a lot of, I guess Rob Manfred doesn't really like baseball. Or, boy, Rob Manfred is really screwing this whole thing up. And yeah, there is that part of it, but Rob Manfred is being paid to be the pincushion for all of the angst, the fan angst and ire that would normally be directed at the owners. If the owners were behind the scenes saying, hey, Rob, come on, man, we got to just get a deal done. We got to get back out on the diamond. Like, it's more important than just money here. Like, let's get these teams together. Let's make a deal for the betterment of the game. Rob Manfred would do that. And that would be the message. And so this is all coming from ownership directly. And that was Roger Goodell's big problem too with the NFL, is that he was a $44 million target for media, for fans to criticize and stuff and be a shield for the owners. So to your point, there are times that the best of commissioners are able to either, the way Stern did it, was get the owners in the room and just browbeat them and like just yell at them and scream at them and say, listen, you idiots, this is what we have to do to make sure our game doesn't die. And somehow, some way, he was effective in doing that and convincing and strong-arming them into it. Then there's the Adam Silver type who has more of a velvet glove and seems to build consensus and says, hey, Glenn Taylor, hey, Jerry Reinsdorf, have you thought about this side of things? And maybe we need to look at that, and makes the owners feel like they are making all of the decisions themselves, even if they're being gently steered some way or somehow. But so far, the evidence would show that Rob Manfred is not up to that task. And absolutely right now is the time that you need someone who isn't going to just be doing the bidding of the owners, but is able to have some convincing to him, to be able to just cajole them a little bit and say, look, this is going to be devastating for our game if we don't find a way to give a little bit and get something back out there, and it's just not happening.
Yeah, some of it is the ability to argue your case and make that point, and some people are better at the art of persuasion than others. Some people, even if they know, it may end up sometimes costing them their job next time there's a vote. There's a willingness to still make those moves and try to think beyond. And in some cases, I think Stern was good at what you say, convincing them that this may feel like it's bitter to swallow as a pill right now, but I'm here to tell you what you're going to have to swallow 3 years from now. You're going to have an even worse upset stomach if you don't understand the bigger picture of it. So again, it is, what I'm arguing for is, you could say, maybe unrealistic in some cases, because in the case of Major League Baseball, any commissioner who's tried to do that has tended to get knocked down pretty quickly. But there are some who've been able to navigate it, and maybe some of it is just the ability to talk to people. I don't know. Let me ask you about the NBA situation here. Because there were new developments over the weekend, some players talking about, well, there's the safety component, I think, still being raised by some players. Others maybe are going down the road of they're concerned about what's going on in the country right now. You factor in that with the safety. Are we just better off not playing at all right now? Are we sending the wrong message if we play at all? So do we have potentially a real crisis here, you think, in terms of sticking to the schedule that's now in place? Or are you hearing that behind the scenes efforts are being made to try to get everybody on the same page, both players and owners in that regard?
Yeah, I think it's certainly different from baseball, Dan, in terms of what baseball comes down to right now is just pure money. And that is the divide, and that's what's keeping things from getting to a point where they can play. There's not really concerns about safety that you're hearing from players. There's not, there are some, but not near as much. I think on the basketball side of things, with the increase in the number of cases in the Florida area where this is going on, there is some concern about that. There's some concern from players about being stuck inside a bubble for 3 months and away from family and things like that. And then also there is the quote-unquote optics of the situation, where there are some players who are saying, hey, with all of the civil unrest that is going on right now, is it smart to be playing this game? Should we be providing a distraction when we need everyone focused on the problems that society in general is facing right now? And so they're real conversations, Dan, and I don't want to discount them at all, because I do think that inevitably the players did have to get to this point where they're having these substantive conversations, and it's not just a rubber stamp where, hey, yeah, we're going to play. Okay, let's get back out there and get after it, and let's do it. These are important conversations to have amongst themselves to see who's comfortable and what issues they need to address before they're ready to go in there. But the indications that I've been able to get from people behind the scenes and talking on both sides of the issue, I do think that these are just constructive conversations and not anything that is going to derail a plan to eventually start playing in Orlando at the end of July. I think that there still are, when you talk to people who know a lot of the players involved in things, there's just a motivation on the majority of players to get back out there and play. And they believe that, that the platform that will be, millions and millions of people tuning in every single night to watch these games will give them a megaphone that they wouldn't have otherwise to express their views on social justice, on police reform, on all of those things. And they also just want to get back to start putting some money in their pockets, to all of those things that factor in. So while I think that these conversations are definitely real and genuine, I don't see it getting to a point where anything is in jeopardy at this point.
What are you hearing about the excluded 8? We're one of those 8, about a consolation tournament involving those 8 teams. Does it fascinate you? Is it really going anywhere, or was it a contrived story that Gaardsy tried to make too much of last week?
Well, I will say that I can tell you the Timberwolves are very much trying to get some sort of thing put together where there can be some joint practices or maybe even some sort of pseudo exhibition games against other teams they really want to have the opportunity to have their team together at some point this summer, and then maybe have a little bit of competitive environment with other teams, because they just think that being idle from March 10th until training camps open in late November, probably, for a season in 2020, 2021, is just going to be an incredible disadvantage for them competitively. And so they are pushing to try and get something with the league hammered out where they can do it. There are a lot of obstacles to any sort of kind of summer league type of a situation, because you would have to get union approval for that. You would have to have other teams want to get involved. And I think there are some teams that do. There are others like the Golden State Warriors that don't really want any part of it. And so it's very much in the formative stages right now, but there's a lot of conversation about getting something like that for these teams that are left out, that aren't going to be able to have their own training camp and get down to Orlando and play in any games, playing any playoffs, because they think the team building aspect and the player development part of that is just too important to miss out on.
Let's bring it back to the start of this show to wrap things up with you today, Johnny Athletic. I mentioned early in the show that on June 15, 1994, so exactly 26 years ago today, the National Basketball Association's Franchise Location Committee unanimously voted to block the sale of the Timberwolves to Top Rank, meaning that the team was not going to move to New Orleans. At the time, many of us celebrated the effort by, speaking of a commissioner, David Stern, who was really the guy front and center saying this doesn't smell right. There's a lot of good reasons not to do this and to block this. But 26 years later, does that date now belong as a legitimate member of the calendar of calamity based on what's happened since? Where do we put it? Is it a point? Are we still capable of celebrating that anniversary, or should it be a calendar of calamity entrant for this particular date, June 15th?
So you're saying that maybe that it actually is just responsible for heartache and pain and suffering for most sports fans? And,
yes.
And we should look down on it and rue the day that they didn't let this team leave?
That's basically what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, you're
not objective, though. So you're not. You may not be any more objective than me. So I'll mention. I'll before you answer, I'll throw that in to the people who think that you're a basketball apologist. But it does give you pause that what felt then like a wow, David Stern standing tall for this market. Now, for a lot of people, feels a lot differently because of all the pain that has unfortunately ensued after.
Hey, and I'll tell you, I mean, there is not a month that goes by on my Twitter mentions that I don't get someone that says, just let them move, let them go. Who cares about the Wolves? Like, let's go. And look, yes, I was going to say I'm a basketball guy. Like, so I do believe that the Timberwolves being here is certainly better than not having any team at all to go to and to celebrate and to even watch other teams come through here. You think about having Kevin Garnett here. You think about the playoffs. You think about all of the fun we had with Flip, and I think that in general, overall, it has been a net positive for basketball fans, and this is a basketball community as much as it is a hockey community. That to have that here has been a positive thing. Now, yes, it's been awful for a long, long time. You could argue many seasons that they didn't even belong in the NBA, that they could have been relegated if there was relegation like there is in soccer, and there's been embarrassments, and there's been under-the-table dealings and punishments and just ridiculousness that surrounded this franchise, and they deserve all of that criticism. There's no question about it. But am I glad that the Timberwolves are here? Yes, I am. Am I glad that the NBA comes here and LeBron James comes through here, and we've gotten to see Michael Jordan, we've gotten to see Game 7 against the Sacramento Kings and some of the other great games in franchise history? Yeah, I am. And I would be very, very sad, not just because I grab a paycheck, in part because of the Wolves, but I'd be very, very sad if they ever were to move here, because I just think that the basketball community here, which is very fervent and very passionate would lose something by not having the NBA around.
Johnny, thanks for the time. You sounded really good without the Opal. Maybe we should just make it permanent.
Change.
Maybe that's it.
I don't know.
Yeah, unless we can get Gessling over to your house to set up the Opal. I don't know.
We can troubleshoot it from a socially distanced.
That's the problem. Yeah, I don't want to put you in a position where your health is affected, or his as well. So we'll negotiate. We'll figure that out for next week. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dan. I'll talk to you.
John Krasinski, the Athletic. We call him Johnny Athletic, formerly known as AP Sports Guy. Kind enough to join us this afternoon. Is it fair to say that in the current context, the A News section context, that all sports scandals should be viewed differently than some of us have historically done? We'll get into that very controversial subject and even attempt to localize